This week we will be focusing on the Bhakti movement. One of the important questions when we examine this history, of course, is who is giving us the record? So keep that question in mind. The term Bhakti refers to a movement, at first perhaps pioneered by the Alvars and Nayanars in southern South Asia, that developed around the god Vishnu and Vaishnavism, Brahma and Brahmanism, and Shiva or Shaivism, as well as Devi or Shaktism in the second half of the first millennium of the Common Era. Scholars discuss and see Bhakti as a sort of post-Vedic movement that developed primarily during the epics era, during the Puranas era, so when the Itihasa is being formed. Scholars have debated whether this phase is authentically organic to that particular time period or a later insertion into particular texts. There are texts that refer to Bhakti, the term, dating all the way back to the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. You can see a quote here which is thought to be the first example of Bhakti used as a term, but there's also some debate as to whether or not this term was inserted by a later copyist in this particular text. Max Mueller, for example, argued that the word Bhakti only appeared once in this Upanishad, that two and one last verse in the epilogue, and so it was probably not part of the original text. The Bhagavad Gita, nonetheless, is the first text to explicitly use the word Bhakti to designate a religious path or a religious school, using it as a term for one of three possible religious approaches. The Bhagavad Purana develops the idea much more elaborately. Bhakti grew rapidly in South Asia around the 12th century in various Hindu traditions, probably in conversation with Islam. So, keeping in mind that up until this point in the course, it has been important to compare Hinduism only to Jainism, maybe the Vedic religion, and Buddhism. Now we're going to add one more religion to the mix, and that's going to be Islam. Now, as I mentioned, the Bhakti movement grew rapidly during the first millennium of the Common Era, especially in the Chola Empire region here in southern South Asia, during which you have the growth of Shaiva Nayanar schools and Vaishnava Alvar schools. Their ideas and practices inspired Bhakti poetry and Bhakti devotion throughout South Asia over the course of the 12th through the 18th century. During the 12th to the 18th century, you're also right about to get to a period of growth for the Delhi Sultanate, and then subsequently you will see the growth of the Mughal Empire. Consequentially, there are different social elements that are appearing in India, not for the first time. In fact, Islam has been present in South Asia since the 8th century. However, you will see major empires that are Muslim empires appearing. So this changes the social milieu a little bit. Of course, in the case of Islam, there's no forced conversion, right? But there's conversion through marriage, and that becomes more common during the course of the Delhi Sultanate and more common during the Mughal Empire period. The Delhi Sultanate dynasties ruled over Delhi from the Mamluk dynasty, which is 1206 to 1290, then the Khalji dynasty, which is 1290 to 1320, then the Tughlaq dynasty, which is 1320 to 1414, then the Sayyid dynasty, which is 1414 to 1451, followed by the Lodi dynasty, 1451 to 1526. The Delhi Sultanate grew and absorbed these warring kingdoms which had previously been ruled by Hindu Rajas or Raja-du-Raja empires. The Delhi Sultanate covered vast swaths of territory in modern-day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, as well as some parts of southern Nepal during its apex period. The Sultanate is noted for its integration of the Indian subcontinent into global cosmopolitan culture, as seen concretely in the development of the Hindustani language, which becomes both Hindi and Urdu, and the Indo-Islamic architecture that becomes prevalent from the Delhi Sultanate all the way through Persia. Being one of the few powers to repel attacks as well from the Mongols, specifically the Kagatai Khanate, the Delhi Sultanate is also known for one of its prominent female rulers, Razia Sultana, who is a notable noblewoman who reigned as Sultana. The female sultan form is Sultana, you just add an A there. So she reigned as Sultana from 1236 to 1240. One of the notable issues during the course of the Delhi Sultanate is Bakhtiyar Khalji's annexations, which were responsible for large-scale interruptions of veneration at Buddhist and Hindu temples, leading to the decline of Buddhism, especially in India and Bengal, and the destruction of universities and libraries in that case. However, the Sultanate would also endeavor to rebuild such institutions and was building such institutions in other parts of the empire. Mongolian raids on the West and Central Asian frontiers set the scene for centuries of migrations of fleeing soldiers, intelligentsia, mystics, traders, artists, and artisans, especially those interconnected with the Trans-Asian Silk Road, thereby establishing an Islamic culture in India from these refugee movements in a more concentrated fashion, especially in the north, than had been previously present. The Mughal Empire, or the Mughal Empire, is an early modern empire of South Asia that is quite enormous. For some 2 centuries, the empire stretched from the outer fringes of the Indus Basin in the west, through northern Afghanistan in the northwest and Kashmir in the north, to the highlands of present-day Assam and Bangladesh in the east, and the uplands of the Deccan Plateau in South India. The Mughal Empire is conventionally said to have been founded in 1526 by Babur, a warrior chieftain from what is today Uzbekistan, who employed aid from the neighboring Safavid and Ottoman empires to defeat the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, in the First Battle of Panipat and to sweep down the plains of Upper India. This is viewed by some extreme interpretations as a Muslim invasion of India, but if you think about it, it's actually a Muslim conquest of a Muslim state. So it's not really a Muslim invasion in that sense. It's actually, what you have here is one group of rulers from essentially Central Asia moving into South Asia, with both groups being Muslim. The Mughal imperial structure, however, is sometimes dated to 1600, to the rule of Babur's grandson Akbar, or Akbar the Great. This imperial structure lasted until 1720, until shortly after the death of the last major emperor, Aurangzeb, during whose reign the empire achieved its maximum geographical extent, pictured here on the bottom left. It was reduced subsequently, especially during the period of the expansion of East India Company rule in India to the region and also around Old Delhi, and the empire was formally dissolved by the British Raj after the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also called the Great Rebellion. Although the Mughal Empire was created and sustained in part by military warfare, it wasn't really sustained internally by military warfare. It was sustained by this approach to various religious groups, which allowed those religious groups to continue practicing, and in fact the Mughal emperors especially were known for donating funds for the reconstruction of Hindu temples and the rebuilding of Hindu sites especially. Buddhist sites perhaps a little bit, but really especially Hindu sites, quite invested in the reconstruction of Hindu sites. So this was a popular approach to appealing to a majority perhaps of the population, but it also led to the blending of Hinduism and Islam. And this was also prominent in the Delhi Sultanate period as well. Although it reaches its zenith during the course of the 15th through the 17th century, and we will focus very especially on the saints of the Bhakti tradition as we move onward. The Bhakti movement witnessed a surge in Hindu literary production in regional languages, primarily in the form of devotional poems and music. We're going to look at 4 saints here, Sundara, Mira, Tulsidas, and Nanak. But just look at the time periods there, and then compare this to what you know about the development of the various emperors, the Gupta Empire, for example, the Pallavas and the Cholas, and then the growth of the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire, and then think about how these various empires and the wars of those empires, both Hindu wars and wars that were being fought by Hindus and Muslims on behalf of the Delhi Sultanate for its expansion alike, think about how that might impact the social setting of the growth of this Bhakti devotional tradition. Go ahead and make a quick post and then we'll move on.